Don't you dare show up at my graduation ceremony. A boring old hag like you will just be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so absolutely do not come." Hearing those words from Kelly made my head spin. It was clear she didn't see me as family. To her, I was just an embarrassment. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" The moment I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. She sounded rushed and full of impatience, almost panicked. "You can't just leave a silly note like that and think it's okay. Where are you now? Come back home now." I could hear Jake's voice too. Both of them were freaking out. "My name is Lisa. I'm a 41-year-old housewife. I've been juggling a part-time job at the local real estate office while raising my daughter Kelly and doing housework for over a decade. I married my husband Jake 13 years ago. Jake had a daughter, Kelly, from his previous wife. I met Jake at my old workplace, a construction company, where he was there for business. Our company was tough on clients, but Jake, always smiling and cheerful, made a good impression on me. I recommended his products to my company, wanting to be helpful. As a result, his company was chosen. That connection led us to go out for meals several times, and we got deeply involved. He proposed, and I happily accepted, quitting my job to prepare for the wedding. Just before the wedding, Jake revealed that he was living alone with his 5-year-old daughter. At first, I thought it was a lie. It was hard to believe, but it was true. I met Kelly a week before the ceremony. She was maybe shy, hiding behind Jake, and wouldn't come out in front of me. That's when I decided I would live with them for Kelly's sake. I wanted to raise her into a fine adult. I planned to take care of Kelly properly, especially until she graduated from high school. I'm not sure why I felt this way, but her anxious eyes peeking out from behind Jake were unforgettable. I made up my mind and decided to marry Jake. It was my first marriage, and my family was against it. My father was furious and said, "They're mocking you." But I went against my parents' wishes and married Jake. If I had listened to my parents, I might have avoided the trouble that was about to start. 13 years have passed since that marriage. Kelly has turned 17 and is supposed to graduate from high school this year. It should be a joyful occasion, but I couldn't feel genuinely happy. The thought, "I'll make her a fine adult," crossed my mind when I decided to marry Jake. "Hey, old hag, where's my t-shirt? Where did you put it? You didn't steal it, did you?" 3 years after we started living together, Kelly began calling me old hag. At first, she was kind and gradually got used to me, but one day she started calling me old, and her attitude became rough. I pulled the t-shirt out from the folded laundry and handed it to Kelly. "Why did you wash it? What if it shrinks? It should have been dry cleaned. You know, you're really clueless, seriously so dumb." I had hand-washed and air-dried the t-shirt because I thought the fabric would get damaged at the cleaners, but I couldn't say that to Kelly. All I could reply was, "I'm sorry." Kelly snatched it from my hand as if she was grabbing it and said, "Really, you're useless," and left with those parting words. Her words were sharp and pierced my heart. I couldn't argue back, so I just apologized. I didn't understand why Kelly had become so rough towards me. At first, I thought she was teased about her father's remarriage, but it seemed that wasn't the case. Around that time, Jake's attitude began to change. He used to smile all the time when he was working, but recently he had stopped showing his smile at home and had become grumpy. He had started calling me "hey" and "you." As Jake's attitude changed, so did Kelly's towards me. I thought there might be something lacking in me, so I made sure not to slack off in household chores and watched over Kelly carefully. I wanted Kelly to grow up to be a respectable adult, but instead, her attitude got worse every day. She called me old hag all the time, and I never heard a thank you from her anymore. It was strange because at parent-teacher conferences, her behavior in class was normal, with no signs of roughness. Jake also talked normally with her and sometimes even smiled. This terrible attitude was only directed at me, which hurt my heart even more. I couldn't talk to Jake about it because he had become distant and completely different from before. I had no one to talk to and felt very alone. Living with a heavy and dark weight on my heart, I was becoming isolated in my own home. Since middle school, Kelly had stopped telling me about school, and Jake attended the events. I had to learn about school events from neighbors. Jake and Kelly seemed to get along well, often going out together. I wanted to be treated as family by them too, and had hoped we could live together happily. It was unbearably painful that it wasn't happening, and Jake's attitude was getting worse. "There's dust on the stairs, clean it up. You're a stay-at-home wife, aren't you? We're running out of toilet paper. Are you even cleaning the bathroom? You really are so clumsy." These were the kinds of things Jake frequently said to me. When we first got married, we each had our roles in household chores. Jake used to do housework while living with Kelly. At first, he was happy that we could share the chores. Now, I'm doing all the household chores. Jake once said that it's ridiculous for a stay-at-home wife to do all the housework. Kelly was an easy child to raise, but somehow that made me feel worse. When I tried to discuss it with Jake, he dismissed it with, "You're not trying hard enough." In the end, it seemed like everything was my fault. The more I tried to talk to Jake, the more a heavy fog clouded my heart. He would nitpick my every small mistake in housework relentlessly. "Can't you even clean properly? Haven't you learned anything all these years? Do you lack learning ability?" Jake looked down on me with disdain. All I could do was apologize. "I'm sorry. I'll try my hardest. Please forgive me." Jake sighed heavily, clearly exasperated. "Even if you try your hardest, you won't be able to do it. That's why you get scolded. Always saying you'll do it, but you've never managed it, have you?" His words continued to chip away at my heart. As time passed, my heart grew weary, and Kelly turned 18. I was curious about Kelly's future plans, but she wouldn't tell me, and Jake wouldn't talk to me about it either. By this time, I had stopped talking to Jake and Kelly unless absolutely necessary. I overheard Kelly and Jake discussing her plans after graduation. I wanted to know, so I stopped and listened. It's settled. I got into college on a recommendation, and I even got a scholarship. "It's all thanks to you, Dad. Thank you." I could hear Kelly's happy voice. She would never speak to me in such a tone. "Good for you. It's the result of your efforts." It was worth pushing all the housework onto the clumsy maid. What an awful thing to say. He must be talking about me. Yeah, it was a good outlet for stress too. I could hear their contemptuous laughter. I quietly left the spot and hid in the bathroom. It was the only place I could be alone. I crouched in the bathroom, held my head, and cried. To think that Jake and Kelly thought of me in such a way. I had endured for the past 12 years. No matter how much my spirit was about to break, I kept being Kelly's mother and Jake's wife. Even when I felt I was at my limit, I forced myself to keep going. There were times when I felt I couldn't get up, but I made myself get up, make lunch, prepare breakfast, and do the laundry and cleaning. If I were honest, I would have preferred to just lie down, but doing so would surely make me no longer needed by Jake and Kelly. That fear kept me going. I spent my days exhausted. Honestly, I don't remember much from that time. One day, when I was out shopping, a neighbor shocked me with the news. The next day was Kelly's high school graduation ceremony. I couldn't admit I didn't know, so I just smiled vaguely and left. As soon as I got home, I collapsed onto the sofa. I had always thought of making Kelly a respectable adult. Graduation from high school was supposed to be a milestone for that. Again, I was the only one left out in this house. I am not allowed to have a smartphone or use a computer. All communication and information came through Jake and Kelly, and they chose to keep me in the dark. I have a simple flip phone that can only make calls. Jake handles all interactions with the school, so I don't even have anyone I can call a mom friend. I have no way to learn about school information. Still, I found out about sports days and performances from neighbors' conversations and kids' chats on their way back from school, and I secretly attended them. I wanted to properly attend the high school graduation and celebrate her step into adulthood. As I was crying on the sofa, Kelly came back from school. "Hey, old hag, what are you slouching around for? It's depressing. You're making the whole house dark. Can't you do something about it?" Kelly glared at me. It was her fault, yet she acted like this. If Kelly had told me the date of the graduation ceremony, I wouldn't have felt this way. For the first time, I felt anger slowly rising from the depths of my heart. "The graduation ceremony is tomorrow, isn't it? Seems like you didn't tell me." I questioned her with a feeling of blame. Kelly looked slightly taken aback by my defiant words, but exaggeratedly sighed to cover it up. "So what? You wouldn't come to the graduation anyway, so why does the date matter to you?" I tilted my head in defiance at Kelly's words. I never said I wouldn't go to the graduation. "Don't come. If a boring old hag like you shows up, you'll be everyone's laughing stock. It's my big day, so definitely do not come." Kelly's words about being everyone's laughing stock made me dizzy. Clearly, Kelly doesn't think of me as family. To her, I am an embarrassment. I thought this time would be different, but she wouldn't see me any other way. "Don't come." Kelly's words pierced my heart. It was clear from her own mouth that I was nothing but a nuisance. That night, Jake came home with a suit and a dry cleaner's bag. He had sent the suit to the dry cleaners himself, without asking me, of course. Jake knew about Kelly's graduation. As I looked at the suit, Jake said with a pitying look and a smirk, "Right, Kelly didn't tell you. Clearly, I am the least needed in this house." Thinking I was family was just my wishful thinking. At that moment, I realized my heart had long reached its limit. That's why I decided to stop being a family. The next day, Jake and Kelly left together for her high school graduation. I was left behind. Moreover, Jake told me, "We'll eat out tonight, so we won't need dinner." I wasn't invited. The old me would have just cried and taken it. But those days ended today. I had decided to leave this house. I made up my mind last night. As soon as they left, I packed my bags, wrote a note, and left the house. I couldn't be a family with Kelly and Jake anymore. I decided to stay at my parents' house, about 3 hours away by train. At my parents' home, I started preparing to cut ties with Jake and Kelly. In the note I left, I wrote that I wanted to end our family relationship and live alone, and that I wished to discuss the details through a lawyer. I hadn't found a lawyer yet, but my father would likely know one. My family owns a lot of land and is known as wealthy landowners in the area. My father also owns considerable real estate and is well known locally. He certainly had lawyers in his circle. I had met a lawyer at a Christmas party when I was at home. Besides finding a lawyer, I had to sell the house where Jake and Kelly were still living. The house was built on land owned by my father, and the construction costs were covered by me as a wedding gift. I had been repaying my father little by little with the money I earned from my part-time job in real estate, which was also introduced by my father. Essentially, the house, both the building and the land, are owned by my father. They are in his name officially. At the time, Jake probably thought the house was a gift since he never asked about the ownership. He was likely too afraid to upset my father and lose the house. Jake is quite the coward. He is aggressively assertive toward those he perceives as beneath him, but to those above him, he is subservient and ingratiating. I explained everything that had happened to my father. As I spoke, tears flowed uncontrollably. I had to stop several times due to my sobbing, but my father listened until the end. There were tears in his eyes too. What comforted me was that my father didn't criticize the decisions I had made back then. In the end, he simply said, "You've had a hard time." Afterwards, my father made calls, and soon lawyers and real estate management people came to the house. Everything happened very quickly after that. It was decided that the house would be demolished, and the demolition was set for 2 weeks later. In the note I left, I wrote, "Please leave within a week." My father sarcastically remarked, "That's quite generous of you." For me, it was just about avoiding later complaints. The week passed as I consulted with the lawyer about the divorce. I also told my mother about the divorce, and we cried together. I can't forget the look on her face, furious, like a demon. I also talked with my father about what would come next. Above all, I needed to set up a new foundation for my life. It took courage to talk to my parents, and it was hard, but once I did, my heart felt lighter, and I slept soundly for the first time in 12 years. A week passed peacefully at my parents' home. Then my cell phone rang. As expected, it was Kelly. Honestly, I didn't want to talk anymore. Remembering how Kelly had treated me all this time, a dark feeling spread through my heart. I decided to ignore the call, but the calls didn't stop. Jake also started calling repeatedly. They were probably calling about the note I left, and maybe the demolition crew had also contacted them. For 12 years, Jake and Kelly had called me old hag and treated me like a servant. The way they treated me was not how family should treat each other. The thought of dealing with them again made my skin crawl, but leaving things as they were wasn't right either. I couldn't move forward without settling the past. If I ran away now and left things unfinished, I wouldn't feel at peace. After the way they treated me, it was time for Jake and Kelly to face the consequences. I braced myself and answered the phone. "Hey, old hag, where are you now?" As soon as I pressed the call button, Kelly's shrill voice pierced my ears. Her tone was rushed, full of impatience and panic. "Leaving a ridiculous note like that, you think that's forgivable? Where are you now? Come back right now." I could hear Jake's voice as well. Both of them were in a complete panic. I imagined Kelly coming home from graduation, finding that this servant-like woman who used to relieve their stress was gone. Moreover, there was a note saying divorce and leave the house. Even Kelly would panic in such a situation, especially on the day of her graduation ceremony. I couldn't help but let out a chuckle at how flustered Kelly was. Who is this?" Kelly seemed surprised by my response and stumbled over her words. I hung up the phone. Afterwards, I called the real estate management company to check when the demolition was starting. It was scheduled for tomorrow as planned, and Jake had already been notified. I asked to postpone the demolition to the day after tomorrow and requested that Jake be informed of the one-day delay. The one-day reprieve was granted. Jake would probably come here then. I was ready to deliver a heavy blow to Jake and Kelly. There were dozens of calls from them, but I ignored them all. The next day, around noon, I heard the doorbell and knocking. It must be Jake and Kelly. They probably wanted to come earlier, but the poor train connections made it take a long time. Jake and Kelly were panting heavily, looking really anxious. I had arranged for my parents to stay out of sight, so it looked like I was the only one home. I showed Jake and Kelly into the living room. Jake entered the house hesitantly, intimidated by my father, who is a wealthy and well-known figure in town with a commanding presence. Jake probably sees himself as beneath my father. On the other hand, Kelly wasn't intimidated at all. She seemed determined to confront me and take me back. Kelly slumped into a chair in the living room, crossing her legs and arms, silently motioning for me to sit opposite her. I prepared tea slowly and calmly before sitting across from her. Growing impatient, Kelly started to speak. "What the heck is all this about?" Jake, who was sitting next to me, placed the note I had left on the table. I just stared silently into Kelly's eyes without any reaction. Kelly looked away first, trying to shake off the awkwardness with a laugh. "What was with that 'who is this' yesterday? That was some pretty bad acting." Still, I remained silent, staring at Kelly. She became uncomfortable under my gaze, shifted in her seat, and continued talking. "Look, you can't make it on your own without us. You're nothing but trash." I almost reacted to Kelly's harsh words, but managed to restrain myself because I could hear the tremor in her voice. Kelly must be putting on a brave front. So far, Jake had been silent, just watching how things unfolded. "Stop being so stubborn and come back home," Kelly berated me with harsh words. trying to confuse and drag me back home. The more excited Kelly got, the calmer I responded. I don't have a family, do I? Oh, I do have parents, but you two aren't my family, are you? I said. Kelly, for her part, probably felt out of her depth. She started talking loudly. What are you talking about? You and Dad are my family, right? Hey Dad, that's right, isn't it? Kelly must have felt at a disadvantage alone, so she asked Jake for help. Jake looked around nervously and, seeing that no one else was around, seemed relieved and started talking to me. That's right, you can't live without us, just like Kelly says, so you're coming back. Jake began to act all high and mighty when he saw my parents weren't around. Looking back, I realized what a cowardly man he is. As I said before, I have no family, I answered firmly. No matter what Jake and Kelly say, I'll keep treating them as strangers. Jake and Kelly are not my family. If they were, they wouldn't treat me like a slave. Family is about holding hands and helping each other. When someone in the family is in trouble, it's normal for the family to support them. However, Jake and Kelly were different. They've been treating me as a servant and an outlet for stress for over 12 years. Jake and Kelly insist that this is normal. They're unaware of how terrible and wrong it is. They've been oppressing me unconsciously. I'm amazed I've put up with it for 12 years. I'm impressed with myself. It all started when I saw Kelly peeking from behind Jake. I was bound by my own words to raise Kelly into a fine adult. Because of these words, I've been desperately serving Jake and Kelly. That's why I endured until her high school graduation. I had decided that when Kelly graduated from high school and was ready to leave, it would be time to draw the line. I had a faint hope that Jake and Kelly would change their attitude towards me by then, and we could be a family. But they betrayed my expectations, leading to this situation. Everything was decided by their attitude the day before the graduation ceremony. So I'm facing them with the appropriate attitude now. Jake and Kelly are no longer my family, which is why I don't treat them as family. Kelly started to change her tone, realizing the seriousness. We are family, aren't we, Mom? Stop putting on this silly act, please. Before I knew it, she had switched from calling me old hag to Mom. Apparently, Kelly began to understand that things wouldn't go as they used to. Jake watched anxiously as he looked at me and Kelly. You may not be my birth mother, but we've lived together all this time, so please listen to my request. Kelly unfolded her crossed arms and clasped her hands in front of her. She had been sitting back, but now she was leaning forward. I have no obligation to listen to requests from someone who isn't family, I continued, keeping my emotions in check. Tears appeared in Kelly's eyes as she pleaded desperately, please listen to me. That note was a lie, right? You're not really going to sell the house, are you? It can't be true because you are part of our family, Mom. I felt disgusted by the way Kelly said Mom. What concerned her was the house, not me. She must be anxious about losing her home. It's true that the house will be gone. Is that what you're worried about? I asked. It seemed all that mattered was having a place to live, even if I wasn't there. No matter how much Kelly begged, my feelings wouldn't change. Kelly hung her head and cried. Jake, upset by Kelly's tears, lashed out at me. What kind of joke is this? Enough with your disrespectful attitude. What's with that note? Come back right now and stop the demolition. I responded with suppressed emotion in my voice. I can't. It's already decided. Do you think you can do this to your family and get away with it? Jake yelled. That's why I keep telling you, you are not my family, I replied, but neither Jake nor Kelly seemed to be listening. Enough already. Haven't I been saying we're not family? I thought, feeling like I was repeating myself. Jake suddenly stood up and slammed his fist on the table. Don't mess with me. I was shocked but kept my emotions in check. Who's messing around? You haven't treated me as family for 12 years, and now you can't suddenly act like it. That's impossible. My voice came out harsher than I expected. I was angry too, even though I didn't show it. Anger was bubbling up inside me like magma. I couldn't forgive Jake and Kelly's incredibly selfish actions. They trampled on my 12 years of suffering and efforts to become a family with them. They rejected, mocked, and exploited me extensively. I was left out, feeling lonely and in pain. I had wished countless times to be treated as family, but my wish was never fulfilled. It took me 12 years to give up. I continued to strive to build a relationship as Kelly's mother, as family, but it ended like this. A self-mocking smile appeared on my face. Seeing my dry smile, Jake and Kelly stared at me in shock. Jake seemed to lose strength and slumped down into his chair. These two never understood my feelings and tried to exploit me until the very end. I cared for Jake and Kelly, but they never cared for me. No matter how much I cherished them, they never cherished me. And now, when they're in trouble, they try to use me, claiming we're family, something they never believed in. It's too convenient. I feel not just a headache, but even nausea. Why did I put up with these people for 12 years? Looking back, it's strange, but it's pointless now. There's no future for the three of us together anymore. All I can do is make Jake and Kelly acknowledge their guilt and make amends. I no longer expect anything from Kelly or Jake, nor do I trust them. Jake stood up and apologized deeply. I'm sorry, please come back, I'm begging you. No matter how he apologizes, it doesn't resonate with me at all. I won't reach out to help, and I definitely don't think about living together. Enough already, I'm not your family anymore, I'm a stranger to you. Kelly also began to apologize deeply. I'm sorry, please forgive me. We're family, so I want to go back home together. I'm appalled by her selfish way of speaking. After treating me like a stranger for 12 years, now what? Come back because we're family? Did she think I'd be okay with that? That's too naive. No way. It seemed I could no longer keep my composure. Words I would never have said before came out of my mouth. I don't want to hear your excuses. I can't trust any words anymore. I definitely can't think of us as a family ever again. Then I placed a single piece of paper in front of Jake. It was a divorce form. Of course, I had already signed it. Hurry up and sign the divorce form. I'll file it myself. Write it here right now. Jake shook his head vigorously, then showed me a smile. Think it over, okay? I was shocked at how bad Jake was at the end of our life together. He really is a small-minded man. I had always misunderstood Jake's ingratiating smile. The smile he showed when we first met was a sleazy expression of sizing someone up. I mistook it for the smile of a kind person. Thinking about it now still makes me angry. I stood up and called for my parents in the back. My parents then entered the living room. Jake's mouth hung open, as if his jaw had dropped. Father-in-law, he stammered. My father glared sharply at Jake, and my mother also looked stern. Just being glared at made Jake shrink and cower. I'm very sorry. Jake started apologizing deeply and forced Kelly to do the same. I've troubled you because of Lisa's misconduct. I thought I heard wrong. My misconduct? Was Jake still trying to evade responsibility? My father's eyebrow twitched, but he remained silent. Lisa, well, she left home on her own, so I was just trying to persuade her to come back, right, Kelly? Jake urged Kelly to agree with his ridiculous story. Lisa's misconduct. Don't joke with me. My father's loud voice echoed through the house, making the windows rattle. Jake and Kelly gasped quietly. My father stood in front of Jake, meeting his gaze. How can you say Lisa was being selfish? You only think of yourself. You really are a petty man. Then he turned to Kelly. You've done some terrible things too, Kelly. What did you think of Lisa? You did it again. My father's loud voice reverberated throughout the room. Kelly must have been really scared. Her body was trembling. My father stood towering over them with a stern look. Kelly, you've been causing problems at school too. I've looked into it. Using my father's connections, we hired a private investigator, and it turns out Kelly had been extorting money from a girl at school. The victim was too scared to confide in anyone, but my father arranged for her to file a criminal complaint. Kelly, with wide eyes, exclaimed, "She ratted me out, didn't she?" I felt like I had seen Kelly's true nature. She hadn't reflected at all. She was only thinking about getting through this situation. "And you, Jake, you've been embezzling money from the company." This too was revealed by the private investigator. Jake had been making fake business trips. I hired the investigator to strengthen my case for divorce, but the investigation uncovered appalling facts about both of them. "Why, how could you even? Was it her?" Jake reacted just like Kelly, showing no remorse at all. They were so bad at accepting their fate. Neither of them would escape punishment from me. They would face societal sanctions too. Then my mother spoke up. "All right, the discussion is over. Sign the divorce papers and leave this house immediately." Jake, sobbing and muttering "no, no," gave up when my father handed him the pen. He sat down and signed the divorce papers. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 8:00 p.m., and the last train was at 8:25 p.m. If they missed it, there would be no trains until tomorrow morning. In this small town, there were no other means of transportation. If they didn't catch the last train, Jake and Kelly would miss the demolition scheduled for tomorrow. They probably hadn't packed their bags, thinking they could persuade me. While I was hesitating whether to tell them, Kelly suddenly said something unbelievable with a sulky attitude. "But this divorce was initiated by you, right, Mom? Dad, you should get alimony." Kelly must have been desperate after being exposed. My parents looked shocked. "That's impossible. What you two have done is outright domestic abuse and a crime," I said. Kelly, momentarily taken aback, retorted defiantly, "Show the evidence then." I placed a notebook on the table. "This is a diary I've been keeping since we got married." Kelly glared at me with a mocking look. "You don't even have a smartphone or computer. What kind of evidence could you possibly have?" "You seem not to know that a diary can be substantial evidence. It's not just videos, audio, and pictures that count as proof," I explained. Kelly looked dumbfounded. "Yes, our lawyer agreed too. This diary is valid evidence." Jake and Kelly finally hung their heads in resignation. I exaggeratedly checked my wristwatch. "The last train has already left. I guess you can't get back home tonight." Mother also looked on with a smug face at Jake and Kelly. "That's right. There are no taxis around here either. I wonder if there's even a decent hotel nearby. Well, our business here is done. Get out now." Jake and Kelly were rushed out of the house. They probably couldn't believe the last train left so early. I watched them hurrying toward the station from the second-floor balcony. As I watched Jake and Kelly's flustered backs, everything that had been building up inside me began to flow away. There were still some loose ends to tie up, but it felt like it was finally over. Jake and Kelly missed the last train and, unable to catch a taxi, ended up walking for about an hour to a hotel. The next day, when they got to the house, the demolition had progressed, and they managed to salvage only their clothes. Actually, I had temporarily stored the furniture, appliances, and my personal items in a warehouse, but I didn't tell Jake and Kelly. I got a report from the lawyer that the divorce was finalized, including a claim for alimony. Jake was reluctant to pay, but his company was pressured to ensure the payment. According to the private investigator, Jake was fired from his company for embezzlement. Kelly ended up getting involved with the police and was expelled from both college and high school. Jobless, Jake could only afford to lease a small, old apartment far from the station. He lives there with Kelly, who dropped out of high school. Kelly blames everything on Jake, and Jake criticizes Kelly at every opportunity, leading to endless arguments between them, as reported by the private investigator. I was considering what to do next after quitting my part-time job at a real estate agency. Then my father suggested I help with the family business, and I got a job managing his resort real estate company. Living in a resort area is quite different from city life, but being surrounded by nature is a refreshing change. I've also started keeping a dog, so living alone isn't lonely. Right now, this dog is all the family I need. I think I'll just live a relaxed life with my dog from now on. I smoothed out the wrinkles on my silk evening gown and took a deep breath. Tonight's celebration dinner at the country club was supposed to be a happy occasion, marking my husband Robert's retirement after decades of leading Reina Enterprises. Little did I know it would become the stage for one of the most shocking betrayals of my life. As we clinked champagne glasses with the board members and their spouses, Robert cleared his throat. "I have an announcement to make," he declared, his eyes flickering towards a young woman at the other end of the table. My heart sank as I recognized Helen Hadsell, one of the junior marketing executives. The way Robert looked at her made my stomach churn. "Amy and I have decided to get divorced," Robert continued, his voice steady. "I've fallen in love with someone else, and we plan to marry soon." A hush fell over the table as gasps and murmurs erupted. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "You coward!" I spat at Robert, my voice trembling with fury. "How dare you blindside me like this?" "I'm sorry, Amy," he said, not sounding sorry at all, "but I've made up my mind. Helen understands me in a way you never could." Helen shifted uncomfortably, her cheeks flushed. I shot her a withering glare, wondering how this naive girl could be so foolish. As the dinner descended into chaos, I excused myself, desperate for air. Out on the terrace, I leaned against the railing, trying to steady my breathing. Anger and humiliation washed over me in waves. Robert had been my whole world for over 31 years. We'd built Reina Enterprises together from the ground up, sacrificing countless nights and weekends. And this was how he repaid me by casting me aside for someone half my age. I wiped away a tear, my jaw set with determination. If Robert thought I would go down without a fight, he was wrong. Game on, I thought. The gloves were coming off. That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying Robert's betrayal over and over in my mind. How could the man I'd loved and supported for decades do this to me and our family? As the first rays of dawn peeked through the curtains, I knew I couldn't stay in misery any longer. If Robert wanted a fight, then a fight he would get. I marched into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were puffy from crying, but my resolve had never been stronger. I was Amy Reina, and I would not be the victim here. First order of business was hiring a tough divorce attorney. I had my secretary set up meetings with the city's most ruthless lawyers. Within hours, I was sitting across from Julie Bowen, a fierce litigator known for taking down cheating husbands. "I want to bleed him dry," I said bluntly as Julie looked through my financial documents. She raised an eyebrow. "Even with your substantial assets, a nasty divorce could deplete your net worth considerably." "Money is no object," I said through gritted teeth. "That lying snake is going to pay for what he did to me and my family's legacy." A sly smile spread across Julie's face. "Then let's make sure we take him for everything he's worth." Over the next few weeks, I followed Julie's advice to the letter, using every resource at my disposal. Quiet instructions were given to the Reina Enterprises accounting department for a full forensic audit under the guise of routine checks. Every bank statement, every money transfer, I wanted them examined closely. Julie also coached me on planting seeds of doubt among the board members, suggesting personal concerns over Robert's ability to properly lead the company given his emotional state. A few whispered comments here, a worried look there, and suddenly the company I had helped build was questioning my husband's leadership. All the while, Robert walked around in a love-struck daze, oblivious to the trap I was setting around him. He thought I would simply walk away. I would be content with whatever crumbs he decided to toss my way in the divorce. The poor fool had no idea what kind of trouble was coming. The forensic audit quickly revealed a web of shady dealings connected to Robert's desperation to impress his young mistress. inflated expense reports, kickbacks from vendors, even outright theft. He had put Reina Enterprises' financial health at risk to fund his lavish courtship of Helen. I pored over the damning documents late into the night, my anger growing with each uncovered wrongdoing. This was the true depth of Robert's deceit. He was willing to sacrifice our life's work, the company we built from nothing, all for a fling with a girl young enough to be his daughter. The next morning, I hand-delivered the audit findings to the board, making sure to highlight the most serious violations with pointed commentary. Clearly, Robert's judgment has been clouded by his personal indiscretions. I stated, careful to keep my tone measured despite the storm raging inside me. I shudder to think how much further this rot might have spread if left unchecked. One by one, I watched the concern etch itself onto the board members' faces. Even Robert's most ardent supporters couldn't deny the evidence of his mismanagement and potential criminal activity. Robert, for his part, seemed stunned by my revelations. The fool actually had the audacity to pull me aside and try to plead ignorance. "Amy, you have to believe me. I never meant for things to go this far," he blubbered. "I've made some mistakes, sure, but it was all for love." I recoiled from his clammy grasp, disgust written plainly across my face. "For love? You jeopardized everything we built together for some cheap fling. I don't even recognize you anymore." As if summoned, Helen appeared in the doorway, her heavy makeup unable to hide her fragility. Robert's eyes immediately locked onto her, his entire stance changing as if their bond transcended the tawdry reality. "Don't worry, my dear," he cooed. "Once the old ball and chain is out of the way, nothing will keep us apart." The naked cruelty in his voice awakened an icy clarity in me. Forget taking him for everything he was worth, this man deserved to lose it all. I crossed the room and stood squarely between Robert and his prize. "Let me make one thing clear to both of you. I am not going anywhere. This company was my life long before you came along, Helen, and I'll be damned if I let you ruin it. I won't let either of you destroy it with your recklessness." Helen opened her mouth, her panicked eyes flicking to Robert for support, but I cut her off with a sharp gesture. "As for you," I turned my withering gaze onto my soon-to-be ex-husband. "I did not survive decades of your insufferable ego just to be discarded in your twilight years. You want to play in the mud with this girl, be my guest, but I guarantee the only thing waiting for you is regret." Turning on my heel, I left them gaping in my wake, already planning my next move. Let them have their fantasy, for now their world was about to come crashing down. With the audit findings exposing Robert's misdeeds, I knew I had all the leverage for ensuring a favorable divorce settlement. Still, I intended to twist the knife further before going in for the kill. I requested an emergency meeting with Robert, putting on my best act of contriteness when he arrived. "I've had some time to reflect on things," I began, wringing my hands for effect, "and I realize now how terribly I've behaved." Robert's eyes widened in surprise, and I fought back the urge to sneer at his gullibility. "Really? You're finally coming around." I was just so hurt and angry, I continued, letting my voice quaver with manufactured regret. "But I see now that I can't force you to love me. You found happiness with Helen, and it's not my place to stand in the way of true love." The smug satisfaction oozing from his expression was almost too much to bear. "Well, I'm glad you've come to your senses. This has been difficult enough without your vindictiveness making things worse." I reached across the table and grasped his hand, putting on my best pleading expression. "I only want what's best for you, Robert, which is why you have to end this affair immediately." His brow furrowed in confusion. "What? Why would I do that?" Leaning in, I lowered my voice conspiratorially. "Because I'm afraid Helen has been using you this whole time, taking advantage of your generous nature for her own gain." Robert opened his mouth to protest, but I barreled on with my carefully constructed story. "I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I've discovered evidence that she's been having other affairs. Multiple affairs, Robert. She's been bleeding you dry to fund her indiscretions behind your back. His face cycled through a range of emotions: anger, hurt, disbelief. No, Helen would never. We love each other. Putting on my most sorrowful expression, I gave his hand a pat. I'm so sorry, but it's true. The bank records, the money transfers, it's all there in black and white. She's been making a fool of you. Robert's shoulders slumped in defeat for just an instant. I felt a pang of something pity, perhaps, but it quickly passed as I remembered all the pain he had caused me. If it's any consolation, this newfound wisdom has made me realize how deeply I've misjudged you over the years. I lied. Why, if I had a partner who showed half the care and dedication you've displayed, I would consider myself the luckiest woman alive. That seemed to lift Robert's spirits a bit, and he mumbled a thank you. Men were so easy to manipulate when you knew how to handle their fragile egos. As he walked out, I allowed myself a satisfied smile. Between the financial void awaiting him and the carefully planted seeds of doubt about Helen's loyalty, Robert's world was crumbling. Just a few more pushes, and his whole pathetic facade would collapse. With Robert reeling from my revelations about Helen's supposed cheating, it was time for the final blow. I called an emergency board meeting, putting on my most serious face as the members arrived. I'm afraid I have some deeply troubling news regarding Robert's conduct as CEO. I began once everyone was seated. It pains me to have to do this, but the evidence leaves me no choice. I nodded to my assistant, who handed out the audit findings. The room was filled with gasps and murmurs as the board members read about the extent of the embezzlement and misappropriation. As you can see, Robert has been systematically looting the company's funds to support an unacceptable personal relationship, I declared, letting the accusation hang in the air. His judgment has been hopelessly compromised to a degree that constitutes gross neglect of his duties. Johnny Depp, a senior board member known for his strong ethics, set down the report with a look of profound disappointment. I had my suspicions given the rumors, but I never imagined the depths of Robert's betrayal. This is a gut punch. Believe me, Johnny, I understand your pain all too well, I replied, putting on my most mournful expression. Which is why, as difficult as it is, I feel we have no choice but to relieve Robert of his duties effective immediately. A chorus of solemn nods rippled through the room. Even those usually loyal to Robert couldn't ignore his huge mistakes. Gritting my teeth, I forced out my next words. It truly breaks my heart to say this, but Robert's personal actions appeared to have sent him into an emotional tailspin, calling into question his ability to lead this company. For the good of Reina Enterprises and our employees, we must act now. I recommend an indefinite leave of absence on medical grounds while he seeks treatment. The board members' reactions told me they had taken the bait. By presenting Robert's departure as a compassionate intervention rather than a straight termination, I had given them all plausible deniability, allowing them to avoid feeling complicit in his downfall. As the meeting adjourned with the board's full endorsement, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The forensic audit, the sowing of doubts, and now this final move. A part of me felt a flicker of sadness at how far my beloved husband had fallen, but he had chosen to throw away the life we built together through his arrogance and weakness. I merely ensured he suffered the full consequences. My reflection was interrupted by the ping of a new email from Julie, my attorney. Pulling up the message, I scanned her concise update and felt a rush of vicious satisfaction. Transfer of assets proceeding as planned. The financial guillotine is primed. Just say the word. I typed a simple reply. Do it. Let the delicious ruination begin. The dominoes began falling into place with ruthless precision. Within days of being forced into a leave of absence, Robert found himself systematically frozen out of Reina Enterprises operations. Emails went unanswered, Meetings were rescheduled, and he was essentially a ghost at the company he once ruled over. I could only imagine the sinking feeling in his gut as the power he had taken for granted for decades slipped through his fingers. Still, I knew the worst was yet to come for the arrogant fool. "Miss Reyna, you have a visitor," my assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Helen Hadsell is asking to see you." A cruel smile tugged at my lips as I buzzed her in. The girl's arrival was right on schedule. Helen entered looking every bit the rabbit caught in the headlights. Though she tried valiantly to maintain her polished composure, I could see the cracks beneath the surface. "What can I do for you, dear?" I asked in my most saccharine tone as she took a seat. "I trust this isn't about your extracurricular activities with Robert. I would simply hate for word of that unpleasantness to spread further." Her eyes went wide with panic. What are you talking about?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing." I waved a perfectly manicured hand in fake nonchalance. "Just that it would be an awful shame if those private investigator reports detailing your numerous other affairs ended up going public. Can you imagine the scandal?" Helen paled, and I fought back the urge to laugh at her obvious distress. The phony dossier had worked perfectly. The fake reports I had made were truly works of art. "But that's not true," she sputtered. "Robert and we love each other. It's just us." "If you say so, dear," I replied coolly. Though if I were you, I might be more concerned with his mounting legal troubles and the likelihood of financial ruin. That caught her attention as I had intended. Leaning forward, I laid it all out for her in brutal clarity. The fraud charges looming over Robert, the asset freezes, and the inevitable collapse of his net worth once the divorce was finalized. "Do you honestly think a man facing prison time and bankruptcy will have any qualms about leaving you high and dry?" I asked with mock sympathy. "Or that you'll still hold any appeal to him once the thrill of your tawdry affair fades?" Helen's face crumpled as the truth sank in. She was nothing more than a disposable plaything to Robert, shiny arm candy to be cast aside when she was no longer convenient. "You're lying," she whispered, but it was clear she didn't believe her own words. Smiling thinly, I pushed the killing blow. "If I were you, I'd get out while you still can. Cut your losses and find yourself a new mark to leech off. There are plenty of rich, desperate fools out there to exploit." A single tear rolled down Helen's cheek as she stared at me stunned. I gave her a few moments to absorb the reality crashing down around her before delivering the final twist of the knife. "Oh, and one more thing. Before you go running back to that pathetic man you've been with," I added with sugary venom, "I'd strongly advise emptying out any of Robert's personal accounts or assets you have access to. You'll need whatever you can get to restart your entrepreneurial activities." For just an instant, Helen's mask slipped, and I saw the ruthless mercenary underneath. That was all the confirmation I needed that my carefully planted mole had succeeded in guiding her toward the path of maximum damage. Nodding to herself, Helen stood and wiped away the crocodile tears before squaring her shoulders in false bravado. "You're going to regret this," she spat out in a trembling voice, utterly devoid of conviction. I simply laughed as she turned on her heel and stormed out. The delusional girl had no idea how correct she was, but not for the reasons she thought. Once this was all over, the only regret would be Robert's. The only regret I had was not destroying them sooner. The end game was finally upon us. Within weeks of Helen's hasty exit, the other shoe dropped with a thud that shook Robert to his core. I took great pleasure in being there as the investigator from our corporate security team laid out the damning evidence. Bank statements, wire transfers, photos, an entire dossier showing how Helen had systematically looted over 7 figures from Robert's personal accounts and investments. She couldn't have," Robert stammered, his face pale with disbelief. "We were going to start a life together." The investigator simply shrugged, his expression neutral. "I'm afraid the money trail doesn't lie, Mr. Reyna. This appears to have been a long-running scheme to bleed you dry." Robert's eyes found mine, pleading for help. Amy, you have to believe me. I never thought she was capable of something like this. I crossed my arms and looked at him with disdain. Really, Robert? Because it seems to me that poor judgment and self-delusion have become something of a pattern for you lately. His shoulders sagged under the weight of his situation. It would have been almost pitiable if he weren't such a despicable creature. But I don't understand why. Why would she do this to me after everything I sacrificed? He choked out. I allowed myself a feral smile. Isn't it obvious? You were nothing more than a means to an end, a vain, gullible fool ripe for the fleecing by someone younger and prettier who knew just which strings to pull. Robert opened his mouth to defend Helen, but I silenced him with a raised hand. Save your breath and what little dignity you have left. This is just the beginning. The avalanche is coming, and you're going to lose everything. Over the next several days, the full scope of Robert's downfall became clear. Financial penalties and legal fees piled up, draining his assets. Forensic auditors found more dubious transactions and potential tax avoidance schemes, bringing the wrath of the IRS. Meanwhile, the revelations of corporate misconduct I had carefully stowed stripped Robert of every remaining board seat and title. He went from leading a billion-dollar empire to being a shunned pariah in a month, his legacy crumbling to dust. The final blow, however, came from an unexpected direction. The gossip columns and society pages that once praised his storybook marriage to me now turned against him. With the collapse of his non-disclosure agreement as part of the divorce proceedings, the media had a field day exposing his scandalous downfall. I carefully fed tantalizing bits about his affair and wild spending to key media contacts. Soon, stories of poor, used Robert and his gold-digging mistress were splashed across the tabloids in juicy detail. The scandal was too irresistible to ignore, no matter how much money was spent trying to cover it up. In one final insult, Robert's beloved country club terminated his membership in a cloud of humiliation. The old guard closed ranks around him, making him a cautionary tale, whispered about over drinks. When Robert inevitably crawled back to me, begging for a chance to restore some fragment of his former life, I denied him with cold finality. "This is the bed you made for yourself, Robert," I said, unmoved by his pleas. "I suggest you learn to sleep in it." As he slumped away, broken and discarded, I felt a new sensation blossom within me, not quite happiness, but a sense of resolution. This chapter of betrayal and trauma was finally closed, allowing me to focus on the future. The battles had been harsh but necessary to ensure my complete independence. Never again would I allow anyone to compromise the destiny I had fought so hard for. I was Amy Reyna, newly in control of my own fate, and the world had better be ready for my brand of leadership. As the dust settled from the battlefield of my divorce, I wasted no time in firmly establishing my authority over Reyna Enterprises. The board meetings that had once been mere formalities were now arenas where I wielded my hard-earned power. Profitability is down over 14% compared to last quarter's projections, I stated firmly, staring down the assembled executives. I want to know why, and I want solutions on my desk within 50 hours. There was a momentary silence as the senior leadership team avoided eye contact, each hoping someone else would speak first. Finally, Daniel, the CFO who had been Robert's loyal supporter for years, cleared his throat. The shortfalls can likely be attributed to the recent transition and its disruptions. He began carefully, not to mention the lingering PR headaches from, My eyes narrowed dangerously. You mean the scandal my husband created with his reckless behavior? The one that jeopardized this entire company's future. Daniel visibly shrank back, his face flushing. Well, I didn't mean to imply. Save it, I cut him off, leaving no room for excuses. I cut him off with a withering glare. I don't want to hear any more excuses about things beyond our control. We make our own destiny here, and anyone unable to adapt to my leadership should explore other opportunities. The room went silent, the temperature seeming to drop as the executives realized the new power dynamics. This was no longer the Reina Enterprises of old, where decisions were debated endlessly behind closed doors. There would be no more nods to consensus or democratic hand-wringing. My decisions would be final. Mrs. Reina, Melissa, the head of operations, ventured after clearing her throat. If I may be so bold, your decisive vision is a marked change from how we've traditionally operated. I think I speak for everyone when I say an adjustment period will be required before we can realign strategy. A few cautious nods rippled through the table, though most seemed to sense the defiance in Melissa's words. My jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. Slowly rising to my feet, I fixed Melissa with a look that could blister paint. Let me make one thing clear for you and your colleagues, I said, my voice like razors scraping steel. I did not survive decades of being gaslit and undermined by that spineless husband of mine, only to face further diminishment from his lackeys. Melissa shrank back in her seat, all bravado evaporating as I walked around the table toward her. I could sense the others watching with a mix of disbelief and morbid fascination. None dared to intervene as the new order asserted itself. This company's old ways are over, I stated, leaning in until Melissa was forced to maintain eye contact. Either adjust to my leadership and start pulling your weight, or I'll find those better suited to my vision. Am I making myself clear? She nodded almost imperceptibly, seeming to have momentarily forgotten how to speak. Straightening up, I turned my gaze to encompass the entire room. I did not fight my way through the depths of hell just to be undermined again. Reina Enterprises answers to me now, and me alone. If that reality is too difficult for any of you to accept, I'd be more than happy to expedite your transition into unemployment. The silence that followed spoke volumes. The machine had a new master, and woe to anyone foolish enough to forget that. As the meeting disbanded, the message was clear: a new era had begun. I allowed myself a tight, predatory smile. This was just the beginning, the first step in reshaping this company in my image. Robert's lack of strength and resolve in his final years, spent chasing youthful indulgences, had led us here. Perhaps if he had shown even a fraction of my determination, this harsh transition could have been avoided. But his failures became my greatest advantage, the forge where my fierce independence was created. I emerged strong, unbreakable, and finally in complete control of my destiny. As I stood in the boardroom, the echoes of my words still hanging in the air, I knew I had just taken the first of many steps to secure my position. Robert's downfall was more than a personal victory. It was a lesson in the ruthlessness required to survive and thrive in a world that had often tried to undermine me. For years, I had been the supportive wife, the silent partner, the one who held everything together while Robert frittered away our success. But those days were over. My transformation was not sudden but forged through countless battles and betrayals. Each lie, each act of deceit had hardened me, shaping me into the formidable leader I had become. Robert's reckless pursuit of pleasure and his subsequent downfall had provided the perfect opportunity to demonstrate my resolve. His weakness was the crucible that had tested and strengthened me, and now I stood unchallenged, ready to lead Reina Enterprises into a new era. From this day forward, I would ensure that my name, Amy Reina, was synonymous with strength, perseverance, and unrelenting ambition. I had not fought my way through betrayal and heartache to let anyone or anything stand in my way now. Every decision I made would reflect my vision and my commitment to transforming this company into a powerhouse. There would be no more room for complacency or weakness. Those who could not keep up would be left behind. In the weeks that followed, I implemented changes that shook the very foundations of Reina Enterprises. The old guard, loyal to Robert's way of doing things, quickly realized that their time was over. I demanded excellence and efficiency, rewarding those who adapted and excelling, while showing no mercy to those who resisted. The transition was not without its challenges, but I met each one head-on, never wavering in my determination. I reached out to new partners, forged new alliances, and introduced innovative strategies that revitalized the company's operations. Every move was calculated, every step deliberates, as I worked to erase the shadow of Robert's mismanagement and establish a legacy of my own. The media, once fixated on the scandal of my marriage's collapse, began to shift their focus to the remarkable turnaround happening at Reina Enterprises. Headlines that once spoke of betrayal and deceit now highlighted my strategic brilliance and unyielding leadership. In the end, Robert's downfall was more than just a personal victory. It was a testament to my strength and vision. It proved that I was more than capable of not only surviving but thriving in the face of adversity. I had taken control of my destiny, and there was no turning back. The world would soon understand that Amy Reina was a force to be reckoned with, a leader who had emerged from the flames of betrayal stronger and more determined than ever. I stood tall, knowing that this was just the beginning. The road ahead was long, but I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. With every decision, every action, I would cement my place as the rightful leader of Reina Enterprises. The company was now a reflection of my strength and ambition, and I would ensure that it continued to thrive under my guidance. The world had better be ready for the new era of Reina Enterprises, led by none other than Amy Reina.